Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for Friday, the 8th of September, and as always, it is being recorded on the day prior. Starting off with some of the more broad strategic trends that we're noticing, many of you have been paying attention to the very fiery wildfire season this summer, not just in the United States, but overseas as well. It looks like it has most certainly been a summer of arson with regards to wildfires, because many of the fires, not just in the United States, but again overseas and in Europe, have been confirmed to be arson. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second, but that's kind of going to be the theme for today, is wildfires being used as a weapon by malign actors. Sort of in the same vein, we're starting to notice a lot more serious events occurring more often. So as we've been following for a very long period of time, we know that infrastructure attacks or, suspicious incidents, right? Really any kind of thing or event that has taken critical infrastructure offline, rail, POL production, transportation capability, stuff like that. We're noticing a lot more airlines being offline due to systems glitches. We've got communications problems. Basically, a lot of the stuff that we've been following for a very long period of time seems to be increasing in frequency and also increasing in severity, which again we'll touch on here in a little bit when we get to the refinery fires. But generally speaking, it seems like, I hate to be sort of mystical about it, but it seems like there's a kind of a very unique atmosphere that's developing amongst the U.S. population, at least. Just as a gut feeling of my own, it seems like a lot of people are just kind of in waiting mode now. Like, we're just waiting for next November. We're waiting to see what happens until then. And we're kind of just hunkering down and making do with the time and resources that we have left before things get kind of crazy again. I think there's going to be a lot of speculation as to what's going to happen over the next, year, I guess, and we've got a long way to go, so anything can happen, and I think that we're all kind of predicting things to get steadily worse in many regards up until that time. So it's kind of like a very brooding atmosphere. Like, you can go out in, public and just cut the tension with a knife sometimes. Like, people seem like just walking around and looking at a lot of the people that I see in my, day-to-day life, they just seem like they're ready to snap any minute. And there's just a lot of tension in a lot of places. Now, of course, I don't walk around every single city in the United States every single day, but it just seems like from my very small portion of the world that there's a lot of frustration out there, and it seems like it's, the kettle's about to start boiling here. I guess we'll have to see how this develops over time. So let's dive a little bit deeper and start talking about specific regions. And first up, we'll talk about the Maui crisis, because so many people have been following this incident since it began. And I don't really know where to begin. I would imagine that everyone has heard about what has happened in Maui so far. But to briefly recap, on the night of August the 8th, multiple fires started on the island of Maui. Though the fires spread rapidly throughout much of the island, most of the catastrophic damage occurred in the township of Lahaina. For reasons that we'll get to in a moment, the casualty count is not really known. However, based on the casualties that have been discovered so far, this is already looking to be one of the most deadly wildfires ever. Officially, the death toll stands at 115, but the final count is expected to rise to well over 1,000. FEMA themselves are estimating a potential of 1,000 to 2,000 casualties, unfortunately a large number of which are children. Unfortunately, locals have been noting many discrepancies with the casualty count and are extremely upset regarding the emergency response to this disaster. Now, I've really got to choose my words carefully when talking about this event, because I want to be as clear as possible. This is one of the more horrific events that we've seen in a while. Also, despite all of the deaths and the missing persons that are still somehow unaccounted for, me being someone who works mostly in the information space, I notice a lot, as do many of you. And I don't want to take away from the seriousness of this incident, but my mind immediately notices the cover-up and the poor emergency response. This is the first disaster that I've heard of where there is a total media blackout. Literally, blackout fencing has been put up around disaster zones, which locals in Lahaina are calling the Biden curtain. Now, let me explain for a moment that I understand protecting the victims, okay? Emergency responders have, for the longest time, taken this into account, right? This is just a standard thing that emergency responders deal with on a daily basis, right? Pushy media desperate to sensationalize a crisis crisis, this is part of the job. Every ambulance in America has fabric sheets or blankets to hold up to preserve, the dignity of victims, right? This is also why crime scene tape exists, right? So I get it to some extent, but there is absolutely no justification for a full blackout, and it colors everything that we talk about because we just don't know. We have to speculate to some degree because we're not getting the information. One of the bigger things that actually has happened is satellite imagery has been censored. Now here on your screen you see a screenshot from my attempts to get some of the more commercial satellite imagery, and I don't know if this is just on my end. I've tried it on multiple computers and I can't get this to work, so maybe it's been corrected by now, I don't know, but it looks to me like specific chunks of satellite imagery are literally being cut out of the larger image tile to censor what is going on in some of these areas. That there's no excuse for that, right? Emergency responders need to have access to satellite imagery, and they may, but they need to have it open to the public. There's no way that you can see human remains on a satellite image. You just can't. It's not possible. The resolution's not that good. This, again, is something that makes me go, there's a lot of problems with this, and it seems to me like this is doing a lot more harm than good. The media cover-up is doing a lot more harm than good, and this is a trend that we're noticing with Maui. It's not so much about the devastation of the fire anymore, it's the devastation that is being made worse by the fact that the government is doing some serious harm here. Another thing that is just kind of bugging a lot of people is that a lot of the barriers and the blackout fencing that is being put up in areas where they've already been searched and there are no casualties in those areas, or the casualties have been removed. So why do you want to prevent people from taking pictures of the remains of a house, right? A house burned down. There are tens of millions of pictures of wildfire damage all over the internet, but why this one? Why do you not want to take photos of this one? So what's become patently obvious to me, my opinion, is that the feds want to cover this disaster up and make it look like it never happened, or conceal evidence from the public of something perhaps a bit more nefarious. I have more serious thoughts on this incident because I have a history in emergency management, as a volunteer for several years, and I have very, very strong feelings about what I'm seeing being done from an emergency management perspective. And many emergency management personnel around the country have come out and said this is utterly shameful, the response so far. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now because I don't think it'll do much good. What I would like to focus on is how this event is a milestone in the community of emergency response and what everyday citizens can do when this type of event happens elsewhere. To me, this event highlights what we already know, that there is no one coming to save you, and we've known this for a long time, but this particular event adds an additional part. There's no one coming to save you, and those that do come for you will not be saving you. I hate to start off on like a negative note, but look, we've got mainstream media outlets like local affiliate stations in Maui running stories where they're talking about locals running illegal rescue operations. Let me say that again. Illegal rescue operations. And they're dodging law enforcement like pirates, but instead of committing crimes, they're literally delivering diapers and food to those in need because the law will not let them through the barricades to get aid to people. So if this is on mainstream media, you know how bad it is. Aid and disaster relief has basically been criminalized in Maui, and I think we all need to be paying attention to that because it changes the dynamic, does it not? Like, holy cow, this is a very big deal here, and I know that I'm kind of like harping on this a lot, but I just wanted to kind of get across that the trust that emergency services has had is sadly eroding away. And I don't think anybody in the emergency services in Maui is trustworthy or is trusted by the locals at this point because of how poorly this is. And I know that there are people trying to do the right thing, but good grief, you've got every disaster management person in a position of authority who's either criminally incompetent or intentionally negligent. So it's hard to get a citizenry to kind of trust you when you're trying to harm them. Now, as far as the cause of the fire, this is where a lot of speculation has come out because, again, we just there's literally no information. They tried to blame the power company, that the power company did not shut the power off, and high winds caused sparking and arcing and stuff like that, and that caused the fires. Well, the power company has come back and said, nope, we've got receipts. We shut the power off before any heavy winds went through the area. So again, it's like the authorities trying to cover up something. I think the evidence is stacking up that something is going on here. Mainstream media in the initial days of the incident were claiming arson, so that's kind of what I've templated. Now, of course, we just have nothing. It's just pure speculation at this point. Usually as time goes on, you get more information and you're able to make a more informed decision about something, or make a more informed assessment, more educated guess, right? But now, based on the media blackout, we just don't have that information. So at the minimum, I am personally plugging this incident into my risk management matrix as being an intentional action. The means of this incident are certainly up for debate, and I think there are some pretty interesting theories floating around the internet as to what actually caused, like the thing that caused these fires. But I really don't have any basis for getting into the details of that. All I can say is that I think the general attitude out there is that this was an intentional attack intended to spur a land grab. Beyond that, the specifics are still up for debate and will be debated due to this, again, the censorship concealing all the details of this incident. I have never seen a supposed natural disaster be locked down like this. Even 9/11 was not censored this much, which gives you kind of an idea of what's going on here. The thing is the government is not doing itself any favors in convincing people that this wasn't nefarious. In fact, they seem to be smirking the exact opposite. But again, trying to tamp down my own personal anger regarding this incident and trying to keep our heads on straight through the information warfare, I did want to mention that a good chunk of what people are attributing to essentially terrorism is really just criminal negligence. Like, for instance, the roadblocks. There's a mainstream story that's in the mainstream media now that a lot of locals, dozens of people, are reporting that roadblocks were keeping them in the fire zone. And even mainstream media outlets are running like a headline that says basically, only those who disobeyed the government roadblocks survived. Now, I understand the sentiment, but knowing how these operations work, I would be willing to bet that somebody was told to put up barriers to keep people from driving into the fire zones, as is pretty standard. But oftentimes there is no way to determine which way the barrier is pointed, if you know what I mean. So a firefighter drags a barricade across the road, like the classic police line barrier kind of thing, and the citizens think it's to keep them in rather than people out of the fire zone. That's why I have never seen a roadblock be unattended. There's reasons for this. There's supposed to be, at the minimum, like a brush truck or somebody stationed there at the barricade to help people know what to do and to control traffic. You never want to leave a barricade unattended. This is not just for citizens, but this also helps various fire crews who might be doing some interagency stuff, working with different crews who might not be familiar with each other. It helps all of these people communicate very clearly to one another. The wildland fire community in particular, like, these guys have learned this lesson. They've learned the value of a single dude standing by the road who can say, don't go that way, the fire's shifted, or something like that. So clearly this did not happen all over the island, and there were unattended roadblocks everywhere, especially on the main road out of Lahaina. So how much of this crisis can we attribute to criminal negligence, deliberate terrorism, or just a bunch of people being overwhelmed and not up to the job? I don't know. But I'm planning for incidents like this to continue and for the disaster relief to be deliberately bad, or worst case scenario, for agencies to start targeting citizen responders. I know people might not like to hear it. They might just think this is just some kind of anti-government rant, right? Particularly those working the Maui crisis. But man, ask yourself, why do so many perfectly reasonable citizens seem to think their government is trying to kill them these days? Rightly or wrongly, whether you agree with that or not, why do a lot of people seem to think this, right? Why do a substantial number of people seem to think this? Could it possibly be a trend that they are noticing? And if people have blown this out of proportion, if I'm just all wrong, if I'm just, blowing this out of proportion and this is just completely not the way it is and this is just a normal wildfire and there's nothing nefarious whatsoever, why not take the tiniest bit of effort to convince me? Like, there's no effort being made to say that this wasn't nefarious. Like, I've got all this evidence. Like, the internet at large has got all of this evidence of censorship. You've got the mainstream media talking about the censorship. You've got international agencies talking about what's going on here. Why is this such a lockdown situation? And there's like, and somehow the burden of proof is still on me? Like, what's going on here? You know, it's just gaslighting to the highest degree yet again. Something nefarious happens, they tell you something nefarious is happening, and they try to cover it up in the most literal Iron Curtain kind of way, and they point the finger at you for being a conspiracy theorist, right? This has been a theme for a long time, right? Gaslighting is just kind of the way the world works now. So I don't want to get bogged down too much into what is obviously an information operation. Like, I'm not putting a whole lot of effort into convincing people. Like, I could put together a 3 to 4 hour, briefing on exactly all of the suspicious stuff surrounding this, but it would be worth nothing, right? Because the people who I would be trying to convince that something suspicious is going on, they wouldn't listen even if I had 15 hours of information on it. So we've kind of passed the Rubicon on that kind of stuff. I think this happens with a lot of incidents, not just Maui, but we get to a point to where it's like, okay, there's obviously something going on here, and it doesn't do me any good to sit here and dwell on it and try to convince people over multiple hours that maybe you should start thinking, or at least acting like this, plug this into your risk management matrix as being something more nefarious, right? I'm just wasting my time, and I think a lot of the internet is wasting its time as well. What really burns me up, though, is when someone who would ordinarily be a perfectly reasonable, rational, decently good decision-making person would look at an incident like this and just not see any of this, right? Like, I'm not searching for this. This is on the mainstream media, which means it is an approved narrative that there's something going on here, which that's enough detail right there to tell you what's going on. And then, like, find anybody on social media who's living in Lahaina right now, and you will find some of the most horrific content ever, because no one is saying that the emergency response is appropriate. Like, this is all bad. And again, we cross that Rubicon sometimes where an event happens that's so horrifically bad that we want to hope and pray that it's just an act of God, right? We want to hope and pray that this is something that is more natural. I don't want to get too off topic, but a thought did occur to me, so I feel like this is worth sharing, is that I think that for a large portion of the population, they're just not savable from an information warfare perspective. I would say probably a good 80% of all of Americans, at least. The world, I don't know, but at least Americans, a good 80% of them will believe basically anything you tell them and can fall for even the most ridiculous of information operations. So I'm just discounting 80% of people, like, right off the bat. But when we talk about that other 20%, the other 20% of people who don't necessarily go down every rabbit hole they come across, but they're more critically thinking, they're actually capable of critical thinking, which I think both the Stanford Prison Experiment and the Milgram experiments kind of prove how rare critical thinking actually is amongst the general population. It actually ends up being about 80-20. Only about 20% of people, according to those experiments at least, it's suggested that only about 20% of people have critical thinking skills, and it's something that you cannot teach, really. So of that 20% of, like, the population that might actually be able to have a rational conversation about something and take in information and rationally process that information into a more complex thought using empirical evidence as needed to reach a conclusion, right? Of those people, it seems like a substantial portion fall victim to, I guess, what would be called the bystander effect, right? It's very much like that case, what was the book called? I think the book was called 38 Witnesses, the murder of Kitty Genovese. There have been several books written on it, but I think the very first one was probably the best one. And this was the horrific murder of a young lady in New York, back in the 60s, I believe. And the reason that the book was called 38 Witnesses and why this is known as the Genovese syndrome is because there were 38 first-hand witnesses to her murder. And the kind of general attitude at the time was, wait a minute, there were 38 people who saw or heard her being killed over a very long period of time, that fateful night, and no one did anything? Well, it's kind of sparked this general theory, which is a subset of the bystander effect, called the Genovese syndrome, in which some people see an event that is so horrifically bad that their mind, in order to protect them from psychological trauma, erases something from their immediate vision, or from their immediate memory. So this is why sometimes, or at least this theory has been attempted to explain, sometimes why you see a horrifically brutal attack or a murder or something like on a city street and people just walk by it. It's not necessarily sometimes that they're just callous people and they just don't care. It's that their mind sees it, processes it, and before they can even have a conscious thought, their subconscious has literally erased that from their vision. So they literally do not see it, and they will recall it hours later. So again, I don't want to get too off topic, but I think that with Maui, we're seeing this a lot. We're seeing people who are rational people who are perfectly normal. They've got, good jobs, good family, they're active in their community, and this incident happens in Maui, and we see the patently obvious signs that something is wrong here. We may not be able to point exactly to what's wrong, but we see that there's something wrong here, and people who are ordinarily rational just ignore it. And I think that that's a good explanation, as good an explanation as I can think of, for why we're starting to see a lot of people who would ordinarily be like-minded people, right? And they ignore things that are not necessarily something that you would think they would ignore, right? Now, again, that's not to say that people don't notice things and people aren't upset and people aren't active and trying to do things and trying to resist and trying to better their world and kind of fight back against the powers that be, so to speak, all over the world. I'm not saying that's not happening. I'm just saying that in my own life and through my own very difficult attempts to kind of grow a community, I see this a lot. So again, this is just a purely random speculatory thought on my part. I just wanted to share it because I think that there's some value to be had there. I think that we're going to start seeing some very, very, very bad things occurring, and the world elites or whoever's doing it is going to openly tell you on the front page of the New York Times, we did it, we're the ones who did this, haha, right? And a lot of people are going to be outraged and then do nothing, right? Or they're just not going to react to it at all because they cannot psychologically deal with the fact that someone might be doing something this horrific. I think that a lot of people are thinking these days, and I think that a lot of people are wising up to what's going on and what they may have done to themselves over the past couple of years. And I don't know that, I think that we're seeing a lot of people, seeing a lot of the medical research come out, people who, they fell for the brainwashing, or they voluntarily jumped right in, and they were not exactly a victim so much as a willing participant in their own destruction, basically. And I think we're seeing these people kind of walk things back, but they can't possibly psychologically deal with what they have done, so they just ignore it or pretend like it doesn't happen, or they double down. And that's the case for a lot of people out there, but I'm trying myself to kind of rationalize why rational people are not rational these days. Why some people just don't necessarily seem to be making the best decisions, even though they seem to be like the kind of person that would. But anyway, I think we've strayed far enough from this topic, and I think that's, I see an incident that happens, and I see an incident where there are hundreds of casualties, potentially thousands of casualties, and I'm already thinking at the very strategic level of, all right, I'm expecting 5 of these types of events in, various locations, next week, that kind of thing. I slip into that mode of like extreme mass casualty kind of thing, and I try to psychologically deal with this myself, and it's really hard to do this when all of the evidence is stacking up that this was an intentional act. It's like, what do you do? I touched on this during the COVID thing. What do you do when you figure out that we're looking at a potential genocide of billions of people? You kill a few million in southern Cambodia and you're a monster. But what happens when you try to eradicate the majority of the human population? Man, I don't know what you do. But I can tell you what a lot of people do is they see that is such a horrific thing, they just kind of ignore it. So yeah, not exactly a cheery way to start things off here. But let's go ahead and move to the national map here, and this is a screenshot of an ArcGIS, or I think it's actually on Esri Global. I'll put the link to where I got this map below, but this is the map of all the current wildfires that are currently burning around the United States. Now, again, this is a big scary map, and you'll see a lot of people, particularly on Snapchat, saying, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And it is. because a lot of these are arson. However, the map looks like this basically every wildfire season. So there are thousands of fires around the United States during wildfire season, and they vary in size, right? Sometimes they're just very small brush fires, and other times they're great big crown fires. So I just wanted to mention that there were a lot of fires up in the Pacific Northwest that were very substantial, as well as down along the Gulf Coast, which were not exactly, they weren't exactly as natural as you might want to believe. So again, just want to kind of remind everyone that wildfires occur this time of year. It's wildfire season, the summertime, things are hot. It's hot in the summertime, who knew? And wildfires occur for any number of reasons, either lightning strikes or maintenance issues on power lines or something like that. Legitimate wildfires start accidentally, but also a lot of these are arson, and it's really hard to pick and choose and say this one's arson or this one's not. Let's go ahead and move on to the Northeast. Starting off with Massachusetts, around 250 National Guard members have been activated to, it's kind of questionable as what they're doing. We don't really know exactly, but it looks like they have been activated to assist with illegal immigrant transportation. It looks like a lot of logistics personnel and mostly trucks. So as many of you know, southern states like Texas have been busing illegal immigrants from the border to places like New York City, as well as Boston and places around Massachusetts. And, of course, these northeastern states are freaking out because they've gotten a couple thousand immigrants, never mind the crisis that the rest of us have been dealing with. But anyway, these states have declared emergencies, and now suddenly immigration's a problem. So they're trying to figure out what to do with these people. So basically, immediately after a lot of buses start dropping off illegal immigrants, they either get scooped up by the National Guard and put on military trucks to be transported to homeless shelters throughout the state, or they get put in more permanent billeting, right? It's really kind of hard to say what Massachusetts is going to be doing. I would expect New York has probably done the same already. If they haven't done so already, they're probably going to, because there's just too many people. Basically every luxury hotel in New York City is full of illegal immigrants, and it's causing problems for travelers, the rich elite from other countries or around the United States even, who want to stay in some of these luxury high-rise hotels, and they can't because they're full of illegal immigrants. So it's causing just a lot of problems for the Northeast, and I will admit I'm surprised that this tactic used by places like Texas actually worked. I did not expect it to work, but they put a couple of thousand immigrants on buses and bus them to an extremely liberal area, liberal city with it's a New York City is a mega city. Boston's a pretty big city as well. You put a couple thousand people on buses, and apparently that's all it takes to cause mass pandemonium. So either way, I would expect this to continue, but I would also keep that caution bulb lit because, again, maybe I'm just all wrong, I don't know. But ever since really around 2020, I don't know what it was, but I get kind of this uneasy feeling every time the National Guard gets activated for something that's not like hurricane response or like flooding response, So, excuse me for thinking that. I don't know what it is, but I just get a little bit nervous these days anytime I see the National Guard get activated for something that involves putting people on trucks and moving them to another location. So, anywho, let's move on down to the Southeast, in which we have kind of the same story as usual. So starting off with Florida, we've got just wanted to kind of remind people about the malaria outbreak that's down there. It's not really serious. I think there are only 7 cases, so how many tens of millions of people live in Florida? It's not a whole lot, right? But I did find something interesting. I've been digging into it a little bit more, and I found a mainstream media article, or actually several mainstream media articles, which, of course, in the sources for this brief, that reference an interesting thing. And it turns out that the narrative that malaria is normal in Florida is not exactly true. So it turns out that prior to 2003, we had basically malaria being in Florida fairly commonly. Not like extremely widespread like, the Amazon or some place like that, but it was decently common down there. And they had a lot of eradication efforts. They did a lot of campaigns. There was a lot of stuff done. And for whatever reason, scientists are not really certain, but around 2003, malaria just kind of stopped. It just kind of petered out. This is not particularly uncommon. Things like this happen. So it is possible. It's very feasible for malaria to basically be eradicated from an area naturally or through like some limited efforts. So it remained that way for about 20 years. So from 2003 up until last year, there were virtually zero malaria cases. Most years there were zero confirmed malaria cases. And the malaria cases that did pop up, it was because somebody traveled to like Africa or someplace where malaria is, kind of endemic. And that all changed last year. Interestingly enough, right around the same time, Florida approved the release of genetically modified mosquitoes to combat malaria. Now, here's the thing. Why would you be airdropping mosquitoes to combat malaria in an area in which malaria has been basically eradicated for 20 years? Oh, and it just so happens that right around that time, malaria comes back. Interesting how that works. So, I hate to jump on like the conspiracy rabbit hole, even though conspiracy theorists have been right about more things that have been wrong. It's just not a good analytical practice to kind of try to make these analytical leaps sometimes. But man, I feel like this is a pretty strong correlation just from me looking at it casually. Either way, I'm putting on the head net when I'm going to Florida kind of thing. I'm rolling my sleeves down and making sure that I'm taking precautions against this kind of stuff. So I thought, very interesting how that kind of all works out. But yeah, you guys can do the research on your own and figure more about it. I'm sure anybody can find enough research to support their own idea. So I don't want to lean on it too much, and I just wanted to kind of put the thought in everybody's head of, very interesting. Moving over to Louisiana, we've got mostly fires and explosions. The largest wildfire in Louisiana's history is still burning. I think this morning they said it was around 50% contained. It may be more contained by now, but it was the Tiger Island fire right out there on the western side of the state. So yeah, big wildfire down there. Not particularly. I have it listed as kind of a more nefarious purpose because we don't know how it started as far as I know. But I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see. You don't normally tend to see wildfires get that big down there in that area without conditions being exactly right. So I don't know. I think we'll just kind of have to leave that one as a more nefarious reason until we can prove otherwise. So we'll wait for more information on that. But the other one was an interesting one. The Marathon Refinery in Garyville caught fire again. I think this is the third time in the past 2 years that there's been a fire at this facility. We literally just talked about this just a few months ago. So this facility we've talked about several times before, and it's on fire yet again. It's almost like, particularly the refineries down there in Texas and Louisiana, it's almost like as soon as they get repaired and back to full capacity, they catch fire again. So again, I don't want to be making too many analytical leaps just because it kind of irks me as a bad analytical practice. But man, I tell you, like at some point in time, you just got to look at your gut and say, this is definitely something nefarious. So anyway, we're going to have to skip over the Midwest and we'll jump down to the Southwest and talk about the border crisis, which is, again, continuing to get worse by the day. As a matter of fact, this video came out the other day, which shows cartels have actually started dismantling the border fence themselves and making nice little gates to get their vehicles through. So again, I can't verify the veracity of this video, but I thought it was kind of interesting. It started popping up on a lot of the channels that track cartel movements, and it's like, yeah, man, it is a true free-for-all at this point, and it's not getting any better. The U.S. government has, again, reporting by mainstream media, has confirmed that the U.S. government is selling off a lot of border fence pieces for scrap steel. So it's like, good grief. Yeah, it's not good. And yeah, it's like I mentioned, I don't remember if it was last time or the time before that. I've mentioned before, like, look, man, this immigration thing is not just something that I can explain, okay? You have to live it. And, like I mentioned, I grew up in the rural South where, illegals were the primary source of employment for picking tobacco and stuff like that. And, yeah, we're finding out exactly what happens. A lot of people who don't know, and I can't exactly come out and say because it just sounds bad, what's going on here, but it's like, look, man, hey, you get these illegal immigrants, man, and you get the culture that comes with it. I think even the Iranians are kind of poking fun at this. The Iranian government a few months ago made a comment basically that, like, look, you're taking all of you're calling them refugees, but we call them criminals in our country, and you're taking all of our criminals, all the people that we wanted to prosecute, you're treating like they're the tired and huddled masses, and they're awful garbage people that we were trying to expel from our country anyway. And you're taking them like they're just normal people here. And, I don't want to say all illegal immigrants are like that, but it's like, man, look at what's happening. There's a reason why the drug trade is at an all-time high right now. And, all of these extremely liberal cities are bringing in, or rather they're being bussed in, people are being bussed into these cities, and look at what's happening. So, hey, I don't want to rant and rave about it too much, but it's like, good grief, man. I think a lot of people are figuring out what a lot of us are. You guys down in Texas have had it bad for a while. Like, I, grew up in the Southeast, and I just had to deal with seasonal migrant workers. But a lot of people are finding out exactly what's going on, and it's not exactly just people coming over the border because they want a better life. It's not like that a lot of times. A lot of times it's just straight up criminal activity, and they're fleeing their home nations because they were being prosecuted in their home nations for being criminals. I think a lot of places are finding that out right now, and I guess we'll have to wait and see if anybody actually starts understanding what's going on, because I think a lot of people are too afraid to talk about the immigration crisis because they don't want to be labeled as being something less than desirable. But for those of us who don't really care anymore about labels, it's kind of patently obvious as to what's going on. So let's move on to the western United States. And really, again, the only thing I wanted to point out is, again, a wildfire up there in Spokane that was kind of a big deal for a while. I think it's contained now. There have been a plethora of wildfires throughout the Pacific Northwest, which is fairly standard, again, for this time of year, but these tended to be a lot more, I guess the word kinetic would be appropriate. They tended to be a lot more active, I guess. Because they were really near decently populated areas. So most wildfires occur in areas which are very far from humanity, which is why you get like a 10,000 acre wildfire and nobody really cares because it's in the middle of nowhere. But a lot of these wildfires are starting to occur near places where people go, which should be a decently strong hint as to the cause of some of these fires. So again, most of these fires remain under investigation from a cause perspective, but I guess we'll have to wait and see what the results are, even though I think that it would not be a bad assessment to just go ahead and treat these as if they were arson. Even if they aren't, you're better prepared if you plug that into your risk management process as being some of the worst case scenarios. So before we wrap things up today, I wanted to briefly talk about kind of an interesting thing and kind of a reminder as to why you might want to maintain some level of aircraft tracking capability. Again, I know that the SIGINT stuff we do, the kind of nerd radio stuff, resonates with some people, but with other people it doesn't tend to resonate. So based on my own analytics, I can tell that people who watch the briefings do not usually watch the educational stuff we do, and the people that watch the educational stuff we do absolutely hate these briefings. And that's fine. People can do, whatever they want. But I think that it's probably a good idea to start, getting a little bit more technical knowledge of some of this nerd stuff, even though it's really hard to understand. And that is evidenced by recently what's been going on in the satellite communications world, which is officially not nefarious at all, but based on my look at it, I think it's decently nefarious. So for those who have not been tracking space news and satellite, communications news, there have been many satellite outages over the past few months, really the past year or so. And the one that made me kind of like raise my eyebrows was the last one. And this was a SATCOM outage for the Inmarsat 6F2 satellite. This satellite was brought down. There was a problem with SATCOM for several hours. It appeared to be just kind of a maintenance sort of issue. Satellites for communication don't necessarily have this happen too often. The reason that this one caught my eye is because it comes on the tails it's like 6 days after Inmarsat I4F1 went down, which is a satellite that's been in orbit for quite a while. That particular satellite is used for trans-Pacific communications. So aircraft have reported, they got a NOTAM saying, hey, your SATCOM is going to be down. Again, for people that don't understand, for some of these long-haul flights over very large bodies of water like the Atlantic or the Pacific, mostly the Pacific, aircraft rely on satellite communications for tracking, for sending weather reports and text messages back and forth. And you can actually receive and intercept a lot of these communications if you have like an L-band antenna, which I might do a tutorial on in the future. But anyway, these aircraft use this system for transmitting messages, around the world, and it's also a very, very strong safety measure, just in case they start having trouble over the middle of the Pacific, where they're out of range of like most radio communications. So when you've got two satellites having issues from the same company within a few days of each other, that's kind of suspicious. And this comes on the heels of Viasat-3, which Viasat owns Inmarsat. So this year alone, we have had 3, at least by my count, major or decently major satellite issues with Inmarsat, with Viasat. Viasat-3 it's been kind of a bigger scandal because Viasat-3 is a much larger satellite and it is for supposedly to provide consumer grade internet access for the Americas, so for North America and South America, and we're looking at potentially it being a total loss. Because they're having trouble, allegedly having trouble extending their antenna. So they're still trying to salvage that one, and they're still trying to fix it and figure out what's going on and see if maybe they can do something about it. But man, like this starts adding up. And the kind of cherry on the top that makes me interested even more has been the U.S. intelligence community's flights of recon aircraft in the Pacific. So around August 30th of this year, a lot of weird stuff happened that's not really standard. So we had an awful lot of intelligence collection aircraft flying around the Pacific. We had RC-135 Cobra Ball aircraft up. We had the WC-135 Romeos, the the Constant Phoenix, the nuke sniffers, the aircraft that detect nuclear material. We had several E-3 Sentries up and about all on that same day or within a few days. And a lot of people on, I guess, the internet sphere, like on Twitter and stuff like that, were speculating that maybe this has something to do with a Russian missile test, because we were expecting a Russian missile test around August 30th, and we were also expecting another North Korean missile launch around that time as well, because North Korea has been trying to put a military satellite into orbit for a while, and they just had a holiday, so they launched some ballistic missiles. So it's been kind of an active time period in the Pacific over the past few days. So of course, due to all of this activity, it's like really difficult to tell what was actually going on. I only wanted to mention all of this. I'm trying to not attribute a link simply because all of these events occurred at around the same time. That's kind of poor fieldcraft, right? But I only wanted to mention these space incidents in the context of China, because China has expressed great desire to knock out satellites, since this is one of the ways that China can level the playing field if a conflict were to break out with the United States, or even like with Japan, regionally or something like that. So what does all of this mean? Does this mean that there is a correlation? I don't think so. I think that link is pretty weak. I think that all of these aircraft were probably out there looking for something else, something to do with the missile launch. That's the most likely situation, either a Russian or a Korean missile test. That makes the most sense because a few of these platforms spent time around the usual splashdown sites, usually the usual testing sites. And of course, China has a very large naval exercise that's actually going on. I think it's still going on right now in the area. So when you've got multiple things going on, it's hard to attribute like a cause to any one particular thing. But man, the Air Force and the Navy have been burning holes in the sky in the Pacific, out by the Aleutian Islands, out by Kamchatka, out by South China Sea. They've been flying out of Okinawa a lot, flying out of Japan. So it's been kind of busy lately in the Pacific. And again, I hate to ramble so much today, but I'm always thinking that trickery is afoot, right? I'm always assuming that something's going on, because it kind of is usually when it comes to these strategic assets. They're not flying out there for no reason, because they may think that they're collecting intelligence on somebody else, but hey, look, Russia and China are collecting intelligence on these aircraft too. This combined with the fact that, like, look, man, the impacts of that spy balloon, that's never going to be lived down. So if I was planning a flight and I wanted to fool the American people, if I wanted to fool an analyst like me who's watching ADSB, and I wanted to trick, all the Americans who are trying to monitor all them, the Air Force strategic aircraft, I would camouflage my flight route so it makes it look like I'm spying on like a routine missile test, when really there's something going on out there that we don't know about yet. Russia knows what's going on, China knows what's going on, but the American people don't, and the DoD at large is more concerned with hiding their actions from the American population than from, say, the Russian military. It's backwards, it's weird, but hey, the spy balloon kind of proved that. Like, China knew where that spy balloon was at, Russia knew where that spy balloon was at, so why conceal it from the American people? Well, I think about that a lot when I think about strategic communications and strategic assets like this flying around. That's the problem with fifth generation warfare, or whatever this is that we have to make a lot more analytical leaps than we may like. It bothers me. I know that it's poor tradecraft. I know that it's poor fieldcraft. I know that it's just not the right way of doing things, and I've got a whole bookshelf of books telling me it's the wrong way to think about something. But dang it, at a certain point, you've just kind of got to go with your gut, even though it's not the best option, You have to work from something, even if it's a bad assessment. And even if you're wrong, I mean, I'm wrong a lot. I'm probably wrong more than I am right. But despite this, you still have to do something, and you still have to kind of consider these things. So I think that's a good illustration of how I can, or anybody can, draw any link analysis diagram. I can use any bit of doctrine. I can create any matrix, and I can show you any kind of cool graphs and spreadsheets to support my theory, because there is an abundance of information. So it's really easy to cherry pick details that makes things seem more serious than they really are. I guess the bottom line is that this whole thing is really just a good illustration of why it's important to monitor aircraft, especially strategic assets, because we don't know what's going on most of the time, and almost all of the time it's going to be speculation. Monitoring the HFGCS, monitoring the Russian Barenet, we don't know what's going on, but we can speculate to some degree and be decently accurate with our speculations, because the OSINT community is not that great, because they've gotten a lot really political these days. But the concept of open source intelligence is really effective, even though in a fifth generation war it is most certainly a weapon itself. So wrapping things up today, I briefly wanted to kind of talk about some sort of future plans and roadmap kind of things that I'm working on. Really the priorities I have moving forward are communications and education based. So on the communications front, I think that for somebody like me, whose main profession, I guess you could call it that, is in the information space, exchanging information, working intel stuff, that's an information space job. So for me, I'm trying to make long-range, beyond line-of-sight radio communications a top priority, especially when it comes to integrating into a more daily life situation. I know HF radio is really boring for a lot of people, but there is nothing better, okay? There's nothing better for communicating with another human over a long range without using any pre-established infrastructure. There's just nothing better, for reasons that irritate me greatly, but it's just the way that it is. For those of you who are more interested in our communications style videos and radio kind of stuff, I'm working on more of that. You guys know what I'm working on, so some of you out there know the stuff we've been working on kind of behind the scenes, so we'll be making a lot more of that public in just a bit. On the more educational side of the house, I think the common attitude is that we have way too much information to learn and not enough time to learn it before things get crazy again and we have to switch gears to talking about other stuff, right? The time to learn a skill is before you need to learn that skill, because by the time you need to learn that skill, it's too late to learn it. and you don't have enough time to practice and actually be as effective as you might want to be. So that's why we've kind of prioritized more educational stuff and kind of breaking down some of the more back to basics stuff is what I'm trying to do moving forward into the future. Also, I'm trying to improve the redundancy of our little, S2 ecosystem here. Many of you are aware of us being just on YouTube as a YouTube channel, but I'm trying to increase the resiliency and widespread use of it. So a lot of our episodes can be found as a podcast on most podcasting apps, or you can get it straight from the source. Buzzsprout is where we have all of our podcasts listed if you like listening to these Intel updates in a more audio-only format. Of course, we've got Odyssey, so if you don't like YouTube, you don't want to watch videos on YouTube, we have our Odyssey page mirrored to our YouTube channel. So as soon as a video goes public on YouTube, it gets sucked into Odyssey. It may take a little while, especially if there's a larger video, and some of the longer videos, I have to transcode manually to a different bitrate and upload them manually like that. So it's a lot more work on my end for some of the larger videos. So not all of our videos are on Odyssey, I don't think, but the process is there. So I'm going to try to do that a lot more often. Same thing with Rumble. A few of you have found our Rumble account. I set up a Rumble account so that we could do the same thing on Rumble. We have mirrored our account to Rumble. So again, as soon as a video goes hot on YouTube, it will go pop up on Rumble as well. Now, it will take a little bit longer on Rumble because they are in the process of pulling in all of our YouTube content to their platform, and it's been running for like 3 months, and it's taking a very long time for Rumble to pull in all of our videos. I don't know why, but it's just taking a long time because it's a lot of content. But hopefully moving forward, we'll have decently accessible platforms for our videos, so you'll be able to watch it on whatever platform you so choose. I'm going to also try experimenting a little bit more with Twitter, with their sort of long-form video format. I haven't looked into it too much, but I'm going to try because I think maybe even an additional platform would be great, I think. And, Twitter's made a lot of changes lately. I don't think for 1 minute that Twitter is a bastion of free speech. Quite the contrary. It may look like it, but I am not sold on Twitter being a good platform for very much, at least the stuff that we do here. So I will look into it, though, for those of you who like Twitter. Yeah, I don't really know how that's going to go, so I'll try it, whatever. And then finally, I have created an account on Gab for us. I don't think there's anybody following it right now, but I've been kind of playing around with Gab because they have it's kind of a offshoot platform. I don't know how popular it is. But I finally decided to just kind of bite the bullet and get started over there too. I don't think they have the ability for long video format stuff, but hopefully with some of the more text-based stuff that we do and like updates and wire reports, I'm trying to get as much out there in the ecosystem while still working on the radio stuff so that we have multiple redundancy plans in place. So again, lots to come on this. None of this is finalized. I'm just kind of working on it and trying and testing things out. But we've got to move forward somehow, right? So I'm trying to do all of this, and improve our workflow, improve the efficiency here so that we can offer more services, more information, more educational resources, more stuff for all of you while not working me into an early grave with overwork. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Lots of stuff I'm working on, lots of stuff some of the other guys here are helping out with, and hopefully we can have a lot more of this stuff kind of solidified and really be able to be more efficient in helping a lot of you get to where you want to be, right? So thank you, all of you, for your support. We could not do it without you. Thank you again to all of our supporters on Patreon and Player or Utreon. You guys are really the only reason why we're still around, so thank you again for that, and we'll hopefully keep plugging along with some of these goals and trying to just make it another day. So I guess that's all I've got, and we'll see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.